Salams, this is People's Dispatch and you're watching the Daily Roundup, our look at some of the top stories from around the world. Here are today's headlines. Protests are on across Austria over rising inflation and the cost of living. Trade unions in Serbia reject a new proposed minimum wage. Migrant workers in Canada demand more rights. And there has been rocket fire on an illegal US base in Syria. First up, tens of thousands marched across Austria to denounce the government's inefficiency in tackling the ongoing cost of living crisis. Protesters called on politicians to take concrete actions to tackle this ongoing crisis. The protests were called by the Austrian Trade Union Federation, the OGB, which has put forth a set of demands including an energy cap on electricity and gas bills, a special tax on surplus profits for big companies, and the abolition of a value added tax on food for a certain period. It's further demanded for a reduction of tax on fuel, removing VAT on public transport, and a massive expansion of public transport facilities to begin with. It's also called on the government to introduce legislation to regulate rent, along with forming an anti-inflation commission to monitor and control inflation levels across the country. People throughout Europe have been reeling under an acute cost of living crisis marked by soaring inflation in food as well as fuel prices because of the ongoing Russia Ukraine war, as well as sanctions imposed by the EU and the United States on Russian gas. Energy prices have skyrocketed in most of Europe. According to Statistics Australia, the inflation rate in August 2022 in the country is at 9.3%. The minimum consumer basket, which is the cost of household consumption and essential services, has gone up by about 16% over last year. A number of political parties and groups took part in the protests as well, including the Party of Labour of Austria and the Communist Party of Austria. Marches were held in major cities with 20,000 people in Vienna alone. Demonstrators were seen holding up banners and placards and chanting slogans demanding action from the government to reduce inflation and alleviate the living crisis in the country. Trade unions and leftist parties in Serbia have denounced the new minimum wage proposed by the government for the upcoming year as insufficient. Political parties, including the new Communist Party of Yugoslavia and the Party of the Radical Left, along with several trade unions, expressed dissatisfaction with the government's proposal. It recently fixed the minimum wage for 2023 at 230 Serbian dinars, which is about 1.9 US dollars per hour, and a little over 40,000 Serbian dinar, that's about 340 US dollars a month. Mainstream trade unions organized a demonstration in front of the Federal Executive Council building, the Palace of Serbia, which is located in Belgrade, during a session of the Social Economic Council. The following day, the NKPJ, which is the new Communist Party of Yugoslavia, demanded that the government raise the minimum wage to about 50,000 Serbian dinars. That's a little over 420 US dollars a month, in order to meet the rising costs of living. It called the minimum wage announced by the government anti-worker and anti-people, and accused the government only for looking at corporate interests. It further reminded the government of its own statements from 3 years ago, when it said that the minimum wage will be equal to the minimum consumer price index. The current minimum wage in Serbia is 35,000 Serbian dinars, which is a little under 300 US dollars a month. These trade unions, including the Confederation of Autonomous Trade Unions of Serbia and the Independence Trade Union Confederation, had called for a sufficient hike in minimum wages. They demanded that the minimum wage be at par with the consumer basket, which is currently at about 50,000 dinars, or that's around 430 US dollars. As we mentioned in the previous story as well, Serbia is no exception to the rule when it comes to how prices have been and inflation has been on the up in Europe following the war in Ukraine, as well as the European Union's sanctions. Migrants across Canada staged massive demonstration on Sunday, the 18th of September. They demanded the government extend the permanent status of undocumented people in the country. They were joined in the demonstration by various activists as well as other supporters from civil society groups. The demonstrators were led by the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, a group advocating on behalf of undocumented workers and their rights. They urged the government to implement a regularization program which is much more broad and inclusive compared to the one the government has launched during the coronavirus pandemic. The existing programs specifically only apply to undocumented migrants working in the health sector and gives them more rights and better opportunities in terms of both work, education, as well as healthcare. The government, headed by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, has in the past expressed support for expanding the program to include undocumented migrant workers in other sectors and industries as well. In this regard, reports noted that a mandate letter was sent in December of last year to the Canadian Immigration and Citizenship Minister, which called on him to, I quote, build on existing pilot programs to further explore ways of regularizing status of undocumented workers. End quote. Speaking on the issue, the executive director of the Migrant Workers Alliance, Syed Hassan, said that the government has been presented with a historic opportunity to fix the wrong that has been going on for many years. He expressed hope in the fact that Prime Minister Trudeau is supporting the program's expansion and urged the government as well as Parliament to discuss the issue as early as the coming week. An Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Ministry spokesperson in response said that the work on the mandate is ongoing. He added that the ministry is in consultation with experts as well as stakeholders to come up with the best possible policy as well as practices regarding the issue on the basis of lessons learned from the past. Reports noted that several labour groups and unions took part in the demonstrations held on Sunday. They were seen waving signs as well as holding up posters and banners while chanting slogans as well as talking to their fellow demonstrators. And finally, the biggest military base being illegally operated by the United States in Syria came under heavy attack also on Sunday, September the 18th. Reports indicate that the US base in the Al Omar oil field in the Deir al-Zawar province in eastern Syria was targeted with rocket attacks. The US has been active in Syria for several years after launching a military intervention in the country. It's built several military bases across Syria for this purpose. It's further claimed that its troops' presence is also necessary to ensure that oil reserves from fields in northeastern Syria don't fall into the control of terrorist groups such as ISIS. The Syrian government has rejected the US's stand on this issue and accused the US as well as its allies in the region of stealing and profiting from the oil and other natural resources of the country. The rocket attack on Sunday was the most intense to be reported against a US base in Syria since the intervention began. The attack caused multiple explosions and resulted in smoke as well as fire in the area. US military helicopters were seen flying over the area after the attack, seemingly to observe as well as assess damage done to the base. There were no reports of any injuries or casualties. A similar attack was carried out against another US base in the nearby Hasaka province earlier in the day. The Hasaka base was also subject to rocket attacks, with apparently the specific target being a US outpost located in the Al-Shaddadi town on the southern outskirts of the provincial capital. So far, no group or militia has claimed responsibility for either of the two rocket attacks. And that's all we have on this episode of the Daily Roundup. For more on all of these stories as well as the rest of the work we do, visit our website peoplesdispatch.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.